अब दिन वो प्यारा आया है जिस दिन का हम इंतजार किया, इंतजार की घड़ियां बीत गई, ढल गई रात
Yeah, I don't
भोर
know.
हुई,
Trump's gonna end all wars,
मई
all wars,
दिन
and
हमारा आया
she's literally got. Okay, let's
है.
begin this. All right. Wait, how do you want me to introduce you?
I don't say my name, so you can just, like, call me Panjabicommie
Okay,
and say whatever, I don't know.
okay, that's good. Hey, yo, what's up, fellas? I'm here with Panjabicommie today. We're gonna be talking about Punjab, India, communism, things like that. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I go by Panjabicommie. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram. And yeah, I just post political content online.
Um, I've explained what Punjab is, but could you explain super quick again, just for like, because my viewer base is super whitewashed. I'm not gonna lie. So you know.
Yeah, so in short, I guess Punjab is a region in South Asia. Panj means five, Ab means water. It's the land of the five rivers. After the partition of India, it's currently divided between India and Pakistan.
Yep, couldn't have explained it better myself. Okay, starting off with our questions. You on your website have talked about Gandhi's true legacy. What is it compared to like the common liberal understandings?
Yeah, so we've often seen Gandhi being celebrated by like the West as someone who's an advocate for nonviolence. Um and you may have heard the quotes like an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind or like be the change you want to see in the world, things like that. Um but this framing of him doesn't discuss like how weird he was in certain cases. Like he had a weird diet, which he also, like, imposes dietary restrictions on other people around him. Um, and the diet led to him having constipation, and, like, to fix the constipation, he, like, would use young girls. Um, so he would, like, sleep next to young girls, and this was also to, like, curb his sex drive, but, he would, like, get nude massages from them, and, like, he even, like, had weird, like, family, like, connections doing this with him, like, his own grandniece was one of them. Um, and he also hated women, also his wife. Like, he said he couldn't look like her, said that she reminded him of a dumb cow. He also had a history of cheating on her with, like, girls from his, like, ashram, which is, like, basically, like, this little religious gathering place. Um, and then also, like, bigotry. I can't really go into it too much because it would take, like, hours, but there's a book called The Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, which goes into his, like, anti-Blackness. Because while he was working in South Africa, he was blaming, um, the Black South Africans, like the indigenous people where he was at, instead of the white people, and he was basically joining forces with the oppressors. And then he was also supporting fascism. He, like, praised Mussolini, even wrote to Hitler multiple times. And then, he was also casteist, like, he spoke over a lot of, like, Dalit people and Dalit activists, like, Ambedkar being one of them, who's a prominent face of the anti-caste movement. But yeah, I think, like, specifically in the West, he's pedestaled because they want to highlight nonviolence, so people keep protesting peacefully.
I mean, I don't know. The whole nonviolence thing is like it hides a lot of violence in it, especially in like Indian society with like the casteism and just like the insane inequality. Like, will you have like these billionaires that live in like multi mansions while like people are barely even getting paid? It's
Look, just get high, the block, all those Yeah, definitely, it's just, like, the framing, it's, like, what's considered violence.
Hi, is this amazing ad?
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's definitely used as like a symbol by the Indian state. In like he's on all the money, he's everywhere, but like it's for a good reason. It's because he represented like, oh yeah, here's my opinion on Gandhi. He represented a burgeoning bourgeois class in India, like that had found itself a nice little niche under British India, right? The British Raj, and wanted to throw off the British Raj, but otherwise keep itself in that little nice niche that it found as like a pseudo national bourgeois. And, so Gandhi really represents an unfinished revolution. That's how I would characterize them, at least.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's a good framing.
For sure, for sure. Okay. Number two. What are the biggest issues facing modern day India right now?
Okay, I would say the violence against minorities is a huge one. Um, like with that, of course, comes the suppression of free speech. There's a lot of policies like the IPC and the UAPA, which are like used to arrest people and like lock them up for advocating for human rights. You may have heard of the examples, Arundhati Roy being a big one, where she was like threatened to be arrested for her remarks from over 14 years ago, from 2010, for her like speaking out about Kashmir. And then Gian Sai Baba is another one who he wrote a book called Why Do You Fear My Way So Much? Which includes his letters and poems when he was in prison. And like he was basically made to be disabled because he was so medically neglected and like tortured that like he became disabled and he died in prison recently. And he was just thrown in because of quote unquote potential Maoist links. Um, and so just kind of like the weaponization of policies and such to harm minorities, but then act like they're the ones that are causing the harm.
Yeah. What are the big minority groups that are oppressed? Especially, I know Muslims as a religious minority are very often targeted. Are there any other big ones that are targeted by the Indian state?
Yeah, I would say Sikhs, indigenous people, and then also caste oppressed people, especially Dalits.
Dalits. Okay. Okay. Um, that's yeah. I have my family's all over the place. Before this started, I was telling you about like an uncle who's a Trump voter. I also have an uncle who's a vice president of a Maoist party in Punjab. It's called Labor Farmers Union Party or something. But he's been in and out of jail his whole life, basically. So. I know firsthand, just how repressive the Indian state is. He's been thrown in jail for even just daring to say like, "Oh, teachers deserve to be paid more." It's just small petty stuff. And there's crazy stories. I mean, like this one time they threw him into jail, and they even threw his cow into jail with him. I don't know why they did that, but they grabbed everything from his
What?
house,
Uh-huh.
literally everything from his little house, and they put him into jail with his plates, his cow, his everything. I think it was like supposed to be like a political statement or something.
Oh wow.
Yeah. You can laugh at it. It's okay. He finds it funny also.
No, that's horrible. But it's also interesting because it's like the same forces that are used here in Turtle Island and the same tactics, and they're just also being used back at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, let's see. Why have we seen a rise in Hindu nationalism and the BJP within recent years? Are they at the end of liberalism as we know it in India? What role are they playing in Indian politics?
Mhm. I would say that when fascism rises, liberal and neoliberal democracies honestly start to reveal how sinister they actually are. Um, and we've been witnessing this right now, like how the ruling class is attempting to preserve its control over the proletariat, to maintain its power. And like I think like from like what we can see with the good media, which is basically like the far right like media representation that the government's getting, to just how like the institutions, like the everyday institutions in India are like operating, um, they're influencing the people, which is also like adding to the power that the fascism has. And I like want to reference like Antonio Gramsci and his ideas of cultural hegemony, um, because the BJP has been able to not only instill and preserve the like harmful and dangerous beliefs, but also tactfully manufacture consent from diverse populations.
Hmm. Hmm. How has it built this coalition? Is it just simply on like we're all Hindu, or like is it something else?
I would say it's like a mixture of things. Like because it's interesting because we see like these ideas of like, oh, like we're all one, secularism, we're all united. But then we also see that there's differences between people and those are seen as a threat. So I think like at least through the media, it's been a lot of like they're they're a threat to us. we need to preserve our own values, otherwise they're going to take over.
Yes, yes. We've also seen women's rights under attack in India. Do you think that this has played off as another way to just divide the working class? How we've seen a lot of just rollbacks and attacks on people even daring to fight for women's rights.
Yeah, I honestly think it's all connected.
Okay.
Like the whole goal was to suppress the marginalized people fighting out, whether that's women, whether that's people who are caste oppressed, or anything in between.
Okay. Well, fascism usually has an in group and an out group. In India, there's a lot less, I feel like, resources to go around for like that in group to even have, right? Like fascism always has this like sort of air of like we only have limited resources because of the artificial scarcities of capitalism. We're going to protect that in group and then the out group will get fucked over. What promises are they making to this in group in India, this Hindu nationalist group?
I would say that they're honestly promising like like oh, there's a lot of examples. I'm like, which one do I pick? Like they are promising them rights that they will be able to raise their families to be Hindu in the future, which I think that's a huge one because there's a fear of losing that part of like their identity. Um, and I think also land is one of them because they're threatening them that's like, oh, if other people take your land, like where will you go? Or like take our land, where will we go?
Mm, mm.
But yeah, I honestly haven't like thought of this specifically. So I'm like, oh wow, that's a good question.
It's okay. It's okay. Um, yeah, because I feel like the deal that they're giving a lot of Indians isn't a very good one, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
the rich will stay in place, right? You know, you'll still have this like absolutely disgusting like inequality, but at least you'll get to like attack and lynch Muslims. Like it's not a very good deal from the outside. But I'm trying to like I've always been trying to figure out like the psychology of how you create these kinds of people. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, yeah, it's interesting because it's like you're losing your some of your own rights and things that would benefit you because you just hate this other group enough to not care.
Mm, mm. Do you think the BJP is sort of the end of the farce of liberalism in India, or do you think it will be able to meld itself with the liberal system in a way like we're seeing like the rise of fascism in Europe, but it's not how it was before, where it like completely rejects liberalism. It allows some of the institutions to exist. Do you think it's sort of like this, or will it implement in that dictatorship of Mussolini or oh, I almost said Gandhi. Hitler or, what have you.
Oh, hmm. Could you rephrase that real quick? Sorry, I like totally, totally blanked over it.
Is the BJP the end of liberal institutions in India, or you think they'll preserve them?
I feel like thing is, it's like, what do you define as liberal institutions? Because I feel like the liberal institutions that are at play are still corrupt,
Mm,
right?
absolutely.
Because it's like, of course, like as communists, like we see liberalism as being faulty. And I think like the BJP is moving against like these promises of reform, like caste, like, like reservations and things of this sort. Like they're wanting to get rid of those, saying like, oh, we need merit. We don't need these things. But I would honestly say like liberalism is already dying. Like it's barely like a thing. Like it's just like there by name, but not actually like anything helpful in practice.
What are you, some kind of communist? What the fuck? Okay. Um, what are the biggest issues facing the Punjab right now?
Yeah, so we were speaking about like Sikhs being an oppressed group in Punjab. I mean in India specifically, but they're also oppressed in Punjab. Um for context, like we again like said Punjab is an area in South Asia and it's also known as the land of five rivers, just a little refresher if someone didn't like listen to the beginning. But most Punjabis practice Sikhi or Sikhism, which is a faith that was developed from the teachings of multiple gurus, starting with the first guru, which was Guru Nanak Dev Ji. Um, And there's a lot of anti-Sikh hate in India. And I think, like, honestly, to talk about, like, the current issues, we have to look at the historical roots. And, so, like, in 1984, that was a Sikh genocide where thousands of Sikhs were killed. This was known as Operation Blue Star. Um, and even before this example, like, injustices were always a thing with, like, the Punjab Suba movement, where the masses were peacefully protesting for their socioeconomic rights. But then I think it was, like, over 25 or 26,000 Sikhs were killed. Or sorry, were arrested, not killed, sorry. Um, but then also the Green Revolution, where Sikh farmers were trapped with debt and loans. Um, and then also, like, connecting off of that, like, the partition was a thing, and with that, like, families were displaced, and, there's, like, lingering effects to that today. And, also there's state-sanctioned violence against minorities, Sikhs being a prominent one, but they're not the only minority that's, vulnerable. But people are vilified and seen as a threat for advocating for their human rights and autonomy. And there's a lot of political prisoners, specifically like Sikh political prisoners. I know in 2017, the Free Joggi Now movement started, and that was surfacing on the internet. And basically, that was for a person named Jagtar Singh Johal, which is a Sikh human rights defender, and he was arrested after being tortured um, and forced to sign false confessions. And I know this became a thing where, like, even the UN specifically were like, "Hey, this is discrimination," but then it kinda just stops there. But I think, like, a lot of it is just, like, like, minorities are suffering and, like, people just don't care. Because it's like, okay, you acknowledge that it's happening, but then what are you doing about it?
Mm. I also think a big part of the Punjab's economy is still very feudal. I mean, it's very and there's just so much there's barely any land left. I mean, after generations of like passing on land from family to family, and like each of your sons gets land, and then their sons divide that land. I mean, there's just a lot of people that are now landless. I mean, it's just a big crisis of the market's also moving in and attempting to take down a lot of family farms. With like India's new neoliberal era, it's a lot of issues. Um, with this, we have seen the Khalistani movement, which is a movement by Sikh separatists that want to found their own nation and separate from India. How do you feel about that movement? How should we view it as communists?
Okay, this one's a little complicated. But, yeah, like you explained, the Khalistan movement is a movement that's geared at building a separate homeland for Sikhs. And, there are, like, a few different approaches on what this should look like, but the dominant one is an ethno-religious state, right? And, like, I feel like it's kinda obvious why that's harmful, because you can't even have an ethno state without ethnic cleansing, and then you're adding the variable of religion, and, like, you're just making it worse. Um, I know, like, I personally know some Khalistanis who, like, see, like, a state where Punjabi Sikhs have the right to self-determination, and, like, coexistence and things of that sort. But then at the same time, like, talking to, like, people on the ground, like, I have a friend who's, like, a Muslim refugee, and they're living in Punjab, and they're just like, it's very scary because, like, the forefront of the movement is people who see, like, Muslims as disposable, or, like, other oppressed people as disposable as long as they're getting their rights. And I would say, like, as a communist, like, I stand against all systems of oppression. So I just feel like Punjabis won't be freed, like, truly until all systems of repression are abolished, and that includes class and caste. Um, and that being said, like, many Judge Sikhs don't see this, and they're fighting for, like, the selective liberation, for themselves. And, like, honestly, like, a hyper individualist movement isn't going to free us. But yeah, also with this thing, my positionality, I'm a Punjabi, but I come from a caste privileged Hindu family. So, like, I encourage, like, anyone listening to listen to the perspectives of like, Dalit Sikhs and Muslims, and then also, like, the different frameworks associated with Khalistan in general.
Yeah, but I think even if you're not sick, you sort of hit the issues of the movement on the head. I mean, It's a very reactionary movement. It's rooted in, first of all, of course, I believe like 30% of Punjab is Hindu. That was like the last. So like founding a Sikh homeland and a Sikh sort of ethno state in a I said Sikh so fucking right there. Oh my god, I saw. Oh, I when I saw, um, founding a Sikh homeland in like a state that has like a 30% Hindu population. What's gonna happen to those 30% Hindus? I mean, or the Muslims that live there? You can't really. These are questions that have to be answered, and of course, I don't see any Khalistanis that are Dalit. It's all Jat. And Jat are the like farmers, landowners. Dalits are people who work under them. For anybody who doesn't know, their Dalits are like the landless sort of caste that works for the Jat. So where is the Jat? I mean the Dalit liberation, right? You know, it's the movement is based in very valid reasons, right? Like there is oppression against Sikhs. Of course, we saw the 1984 ethnic cleansings, and there's a lot of issues with Punjab. It's a very underinvested area. A lot of schools are not that good there. The infrastructure seriously needs to be updated. It's ignored by the Indian state, but the solution of Khalistan is not one that's very satisfactory, I think. If
You were cutting off you a little bit.
Okay. All I said was basically it's not a very satisfactory answer, but it is rooted in very real issues.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I would say like a huge thing is like a lot of people that stand against the movement do so for the wrong reasons. But at the same time, I feel like there are valid critiques and like it needs to be like also recognized as not being like in bad faith.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I myself I've received some death threats from Khalistanis online. So, you know, there's that. But you can criticize it without being racist. I mean, I think a lot of people do it in a racist way, but the most good faith criticism you can make is you cannot create an ethno state and expect from people of a Jat class, and that's not like cross caste alliance, and expect a true liberation. I
Exactly.
think you know. So can we reconcile Hinduism with communism?
Okay. So like the term Hinduism is a colonial term and it's been coined to selectively group together like various indigenous and regional like practices. Uh, um, um, and Brahmanism is what's largely represented when you hear modern Hinduism, like what you see, like oh, like Hindu yoga practices, like that is often like um cultural appropriation through Brahmanism that's being like portrayed as being Hinduism. And Brahmanism is inherently damaging and oppressive, like in my opinion. And I don't think you can reform a system that is not broken. Like it works how it's intended to. Um, so I would say like Hinduism as a colonial concept cannot exist in good faith. But then at the same time, like Adivasis and other indigenous people have their own practices. And they technically fall under the umbrella term of Hinduism, and those are still very much valid.
Why is Brahmanism inherently broken?
Just like the roots of it. Like it's debated how it came to be, but it's basically just like taking indigenous practices and regional practices and labeling it as their own. Just like stealing practices from other groups and other people and then saying, "Oh, this is Hinduism. This is like what it came from us, it originated from us." All while simultaneously having hierarchies, like being casted. Like a lot of like the scriptures are like they literally like have it written like that it's okay to like hurt women, that like like certain castes are like inherently better than others and there's nothing people can do. But yeah.
It could it be used like how could Hinduism in any could you envision it in any way being used in how some Christians will like look at the most progressive aspects of the Bible and then use that to inform their communistic beliefs? Or do you think like Brahmanism is just so rooted in these reactionary, anti-woman and casteist ideas that it's not even remotely compatible.
I would say Brahmanism isn't remotely compatible, but like some aspects of Hinduism, like those indigenous values and such, those can definitely be used.
Okay. Could you speak more about those indigenous values? How do they differ from Brahmanism, and how are they more progressive?
Yeah, so indigenous like values, like I have some indigenous friends, like some of them are from like the Caribbean and things like that. Um, there's smaller practices that have been passed down through generations within families. So it's just like how like indigenous practices in general work, where it's like mouth to mouth, like it's passed down through like oral history and things of that sort. Um, but then of course, like with colonialism, like a lot of those like practices were stolen and co-opted. Um, I feel like I can't really like go into it too much without like referring to specific practices I know of, but then a lot of them are closed. Uh, but it's just like it's not used as a tool of oppression. It's not like, inherently harmful.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I won't make you go into anything that's private. Um, what is the Kashmir issue? Does it parallel Palestine, or is it different?
Cash space. Um, but okay, so following British colonialism, disputes over Kashmir like emerged in countries like India and Pakistan. It's still ongoing. Kashmir is known as the most militarized region in the entire world. And the Indian state's been using excessive force and propaganda to continue its occupation of Kashmir. Um, you may have seen the sign. It was about the Elbit systems, but it says tested on Palestinians, used in Kashmir. Israel's weapons made in Oldham. Um, but yeah, I would say Kashmir and Palestine are deeply connected when it comes to their fights for liberation. For example, the same Western powers are at play when it comes to suppressing the indigenous peoples, both in Kashmir and in Palestine. Um, and also, it's worth noting that Israel is India's biggest arms exporter since I think 2015. Uh, and like the propaganda from the colonial regimes is connected with ethnic cleansing being undermined, um, with things such as pinkwashing or claims that the Arab people and the Muslims are just trying to cause unrest for no reason. And also, a big thing is that the same way that India points to the Kashmiri Pandits to justify the current reality, Israel does the same thing with the Palestinian resistance rising up.
Mm, mm. Could you give us a little bit of perhaps historical context as to how it became occupied? Just very briefly. I know it might be a lot.
Uh, yeah. So, I don't remember like on the top of my head the very specifics.
Okay. Okay,
But
that's fine.
sorry.
No, no, it's fine. What are the biggest issues that Kashmiris face?
Ethnic cleansing, brutalization. Again, it's the same thing with like how in Turtle Island we see like people on the streets, like having to deal with the cops, having to deal with the police and things of that sort. Um, and like often we see like the same like oppressed groups giving each other advice on how to fight those forces. Like being maced, for example, or like white phosphorus. Like we see this being used in Kashmir, being used in Palestine, being used in like all different places around the world.
Absolutely. What kind of resistance groups exist within Kashmir?
There's the JKLF, which is the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Force. I have a post about their history that I like made with some other Kashmir pages because I'm still learning about Kashmir specifically. Like I'm still educating myself on it. But if anyone wants to look at that, it's on my website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, why has caste persisted in India, and what role do you think it serves under capitalism?
I would say caste persists. because it's a hierarchy that's been replicated through the course of time and also in our smaller spaces. Um, like how we talked about before that we were talking about Khalistan, that even in liberation movements or so-called liberation movements, caste is often put on the back burner as like an issue that can just be dealt with later, like far off into the future or something. Um, and I would say like under capitalism, caste has been used as a way for people to get the upper hand and thrive at the expense of others. And like most members of the bourgeoisie in India um, or caste privilege. I was about to say caste oppressed. Um, and like this is maintained through like arranged marriages, for example, um, which is a way to maintain the caste hierarchy and keep the power between those who already have the higher status.
Mm, mm. Um, why wasn't caste gotten rid of under capitalism? Do you think? Did it just reform itself under capitalism? Does it make capitalism work easier in India?
I would say that yeah, it does. Just because if you keep the same people that are oppressed by one system oppressed through another system, you're just maintaining their oppression through another means. So it's like kind of like okay, like if you get rid of caste, these people are still like oppressed by class, and then if they're still oppressed by caste, then they can continue to be oppressed another way very easily.
Yeah, I also imagine it's a lot easier to suppress workers' rights and things like that. Like
Mhm.
when castes exist and somebody's organizing for labor rights is a lot easier when there's this very uh, 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 systematized way to just like otherize these people and make them like the bottom of society to a point where they don't even have any political power. I mean, I don't think it's very hard for Dalits to ferment themselves as a genuine political group when they're at the bottom of the system. Um, if you want to add anything or move on,
No, I agree with everything you're saying. Yeah.
okay. Um, why has India failed? This is a big one. Why did I ask you this one? Why has India failed to see a communist revolution yet? Do you think?
Okay. You're definitely gonna have to add on to this one because I'm still learning. Um, but like from what I've seen, it comes down to a lack of good organizing and principles. Um, like I feel like a lot of like modern, like what we call Indian communist parties have kind of succumbed um in recent times. Like I feel like they just aren't like how they used to be in the past. Um, but I was gonna say like but where people are oppressed, there's always resistance. And I hope like more people like recognize their humanity and like take inspiration from like the Dalit Panthers and like Anuradha Gandhi and other figures to kind of move towards a better world.
Yeah, yeah. I would say definitely the collapse of the USSR put a big. It definitely hurt a lot of the Indian communist movements. They used to have a lot of push. They used to be a serious group, but I think with and the reorganization of the world into like neoliberal this new neoliberal age, a lot of communist groups just sort of lost their staying power and organizing power. And it was both state directed, but it was also both a rot within. A lot of them adopted more reformist positions also, and so I also think that Indian communist parties are sort of a mess. There's like 100 of them or something
Yeah.
like that, and they're always fighting each other. So there's always that. Do you see India as an imperialist power or is it exploited by other imperialist powers?
I would say it's both. Like, I was just talking about this with one of my friends the other day. But like if you're framing it in terms of class, like the bourgeoisie in India, they work hand in hand with like capitalists and imperialists to exploit India. But then at the same time, like some of those same workers and peasants within India are exploited, but then still have the capacity to exploit and oppress marginalized communities. Like settler colonialism, for example. But yeah, what would you say?
I would say about the same. I think India definitely does have some regional aspirations. And It does. Who are the indigenous people you talk about, by the way? What are indigenous people in India specifically?
The Adivasis are a big group. They're often talked about. They're like a tribal group across the subcontinent in general.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's like they make up like 5 or 6% of India's total population.
Oh,
But they're mainly like the mountain and like hill areas.
I did not know. What does the Indian state try to do to them? I know nothing about this. This is interesting.
Oh wow. Yeah, so like I talked to some of them when I went to Punjab like in 2022. And it's just like a lot of them live in like poverty. Like that's the thing where like they're just living like on the streets, or it's very common for like same with like caste oppressed people, but also like indigenous people, like they have to like take on like certain jobs, and like just also like through class, like they just kind of have to stay in those positions of doing like the quote unquote dirty work.
Okay.
But yeah, just not having their basic needs met, just similar to how indigenous people everywhere are treated.
Okay. Okay. Do their what does the Indian state do to their native lands? Do they have like native lands that are you were talking about settling? What happens to them exactly?
Um, I don't know like the specifics because I'm also looking into it still. But I know like a lot of their lands have been taken for like tourism, and then also like taking minerals and stuff like from their like traditional homelands. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's
Yeah. So like displacement, poverty, and like stuff
um
like that.
that is. Yeah, I would say India definitely wants to be regional power, but it's got a national bourgeois with national aspirations, but for now it's a comprador bourgeois that's, sort of happy in the position it got after the end of the British Raj. Um yeah, this has been a very what were the indigenous people called again? I'll have to look
Uh,
into this.
there's multiple indigenous people, but the ones I was talking about, they're called Adivasis.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll have to look into that more. That's interesting. This has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, Panjabicommie. Do you have any final words?
Just that like everything I talked about can be found in more detail on my website, like the sources and everything. But yeah, that's all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Are there any organizations you want to plug or?
Oh, not off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye. This episode of the Pokepreet Pod has been brought to you by our generous members on our Patreon. If you'd like to become one of them, go to patreon.com/thepokepreetpod. Thank you. What the fuck? Glory to Stalin. I barely made. And a special shout out to our Marshal of the Soviet Union member, Matthias T. If you'd also like a shout out, please consider subscribing to our Patreon, where you can also get episodes up to a month early. Thank you.